Hi, my name's Dee, your Professor of Woo Woo, and welcome to Sunchild Tarot, and welcome to a very special guest who I've been trying to get onto my channel for quite some time. This was not the topic that we were going to talk about initially, was it? So I want to present to you astrologer Joli Knott, who is a lady of many talents, and will be coming back onto the channel to discuss quite a few other topics separate to today, but this one has been so earth-shattering and so impactful. We were both quite curious and incensed by it, I think. So, Joli, take it away. Welcome to the channel. How are you doing today? I mean, other than incensed and raging.
Indeed, indeed. No, thanks so much for having me today, Dee. I really appreciate it. And I'm excited to kind of go through the topic that we have at hand. It has indeed made me and several people I know personally and people all over the States quite upset.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just, it is a scary, what happens in America. America has sneezes and everywhere else catches a cold. So
So well put. That's so well put. Yeah.
There's, I don't think I need to give an introduction to the topic of Roe versus Wade, of how there is a stacked conservative Supreme Court in the States at the moment, how there is a rise in power in very many areas of the world, but let's just stick with America for the time being, of a religious fundamentalism. It's been threatening to a point on and off since the 90s, but certainly since 2005, 2010, religious rights, not of any specific religion, I want to add here, religious rights in general have been increasing in their power. And so now we have Roe versus Wade, a woman's right to choose what to do with her own body under threat. And Joli, you looked at the astrology of all of this. So take it away.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen if that's okay. So let me go ahead and get up my first chart, which, can you see that okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, brilliant. So yeah, so this is Roe v. Wade. The opinion was announced on the 22nd of January, 1973. Opinions are usually announced at 10 a.m. So that's the time we have for this chart. And of course, it's in the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., I should say. So, you know, the first thing I think to probably notice about the chart is the fact that we've got this really, really late degree ascendant in Pisces. It's in the terms of Saturn. Usually when you have something in the late degree, like that kind of on the edge, late degrees of a sign, you're getting this feeling of change, but there's also this a little bit of a hanging feeling that at some point in the life of this event, this chart, this native, something's going to change. Something is going to give, if you will. But on the surface of it, we have a Pisces ascendant, which is ruled by Jupiter, because I do go with the traditional rulers. And Jupiter is here in the 11th house. It is in Capricorn, which, you know, again, by Hellenistic tradition, would be seen as being in its fall. So even though Jupiter is in, you know, its own house, the 11th house was known as the house of good fortune and good spirit, the house of good spirit. And, you know, it usually any planet that's falling in the 11th house is said to benefit from this placement. There's a little bit of like a black mark because it's Jupiter in Capricorn. opposite Cancer, where it's normally exalted. So we have that, but the real main feature, which I think you can see in the chart, is this up here, this 10th house, which kind of refers to the public space, if you will. What do we have? We have Black Moon Lilith conjunct Mars. Now, Black Moon Lilith is a mathematical point. It describes the furthest degree that the moon can be from the earth and casting a shadow. So it's traditionally known again as the apogee of the moon. There's a couple of different ways we can talk about Lilith. Lilith in the Babylonian, Sumerian, Hebrew tradition was seen as, or was identified as being associated with the goddess of childbirth, children, women, and sexuality. How interesting is that, right? And here she is, conjunct Mars. And of course, traditionally, Mars stood for, Mars was the god of war. So it's strife, separation. We can also say that it's of passion and drive. Anyway, I just think it's fascinating that you have these two planets that are conjunct each other in the 10th house of, the public visibility.
And that idea of Mars cutting off all of that.
Well, in a way, there's two ways that we can kind of look at this. I mean, certainly with Black Moon Lilith, there's also an association with kind of like the primitive impulses that we have, like, operating from your lizard brain, the amygdala. But there's also this feeling of, again, if you think about Lilith's story in Judeo-Christian tradition, she was made on the 5th day, created on the 5th day out of Adam's rib, was meant to be his wife, but then wouldn't be subservient to him, so she was cast out. We can talk about Black Moon Lilith being this yearning to be free from repression, but also kind of describing where you've been shamed,
right,
or humiliated. So, and then to have that conjunct Mars, where we're talking about this kind of drive, this kind of almost militaristic feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Around preserving this sense of unbridled meanness, women reclaiming their sexuality, if you will, reclaiming that ability to govern themselves.
Yeah.
And this is in the sign of Sagittarius, which, is archetypally the sign of the gypsy, the scholar, the philosopher, right? So, we're talking about this kind of juggling or rejigging of a philosophy. And then interestingly enough, you can see that it's almost partile opposition. Well, in fact, Black Moon Lilith is in partile opposition to Saturn. And then Mars is just a degree off. It's a separating aspect, but still in opposition to Saturn in Gemini. And of course, Saturn represents, amongst other things, time, tradition. And so with Black Moon Lilith opposite Saturn, we're looking at this kind of, step forward perhaps towards an equal playing field where women are able to govern their bodies. And Saturn, on the other hand, where it's like, yeah, you've got to let go of the way you used to think. You've got to, abandon these old traditions, these old ways of thinking. these old ways of Gemini relating to others. And yeah, I find that really, really striking to be in this chart like this. I'm just having a quick look to see what else I wanted to say. I mean, of course, there's other things you can talk about. The moon here in the seventh house. The moon represents the body, represents women. It's in the sign of Virgo, which is the sign that is often associated with health and hygiene, of service. And the moon here is, again, what would seem to be a positive. It's trine. It's in a applying trine to Jupiter. So it would seem at first glance like, wow, this is great. This is, they've pushed this through. We finally now have women with this right to privacy, the right to, because that's originally how this case was brought to court, that Jane Roe, which was a pseudonym for the woman who brought the case, was saying to the state of Texas, I should be able to have an abortion because this is a woman's right to privacy. And we can find that constitutionally. So I'm just going to take a pause there because I know I've been talking a lot.
Yeah. Well, first time I've seen this chart, but one thing I noticed on the back of what you were saying, I mean, I want to talk about that 29 degrees Pisces ascendant, the way you described it. It's like that moment when you're on the roller coaster and you're just poised at the very top. There's that almost that moment of null gravity, that moment of before the plummet really happens. I think it's really interesting considering the topic matter, moon representing the people in the house of partnerships, and right next to Mars and Lilith there, you've got Juno.
Yes.
All
yes.
about partnerships.
Well, and another way that I look at Juno is as because Juno was the Roman name for the goddess Hera, and Hera was someone who, from my understanding, was considered to be a goddess in her own right before the kind of patriarchal culture of Zeus and the other Olympians came along and kind of subverted or subsumed Hera. And so in a way, and because Zeus wasn't a particularly faithful husband, amongst other things, or faithful partner, I should say, I sometimes look at Juno as not just representing committed partnerships, but also representing where do we compromise for the sake of power, right? For me, that's what Juno really does speak to, compromises around power. And I think it's really interesting that, Juno is, again, conjunct Neptune. I mean, Neptune is very slow moving, so you wouldn't really call that an applying conjunction, but they're within 3 degrees of each other. And Neptune, of course, makes things, there's a bit of an illusory feel. And so I kind of feel like in this chart, even though it looks on the surface to be, somewhat positive, you've got the sun in the 12th, you've got this, Neptune Juno conjunction. There's enough in here that kind of makes you kind of go, yeah, this isn't going to hold for the long term.
And Venus can't see what's going on under Hellenistic terms. Lilith is, I've forgotten the right word, inversion, isn't it? When they can't see one another. And they almost can't see one another and all.
Right. I mean, there's something to be said again for Venus being conjunct the North Node. So this is kind of bringing practical concerns of, it's amplifying the North Node, the practical concerns of women, Venus and Capricorn. Yeah. So, I take that as a as a positive, but I think that if you're looking for, I don't know, if we think of the sun as like the plot line around this law, well, it's in the 12th. And so there's, there is sorrow and potentially self-undoing that's baked into this.
Mhm.
Maybe it wasn't, maybe it could have been sold better,
Yeah.
to the people. Um, but in fact, we know that shortly after Roe v. Wade becomes, is put forward by the Supreme Court to uphold a woman's right to have access to abortion on a federal level, i.e., take that, the states can't decide anymore. All states have to offer a woman access to abortion. It sowed the seeds for the new Christian right. It sowed the seeds for the Federalist Society, um, where you had basically conservatives that were well to the right plotting how they were going to get around to overturning this law.
And it gave a beautiful wedge issue for the voters, for the parties to present to the voters.
Yeah, I mean, even that I find troubling because, this is 1970. This law dates back to 1973, and yet the if we can say the Democrats are more liberal than the Republicans, I don't actually believe that, but anyway, let's just say
Yeah.
that for now. The Democrats had all this time, 49 years, to codify this, and they didn't.
Yeah.
So they've left this deliberately up in the air.
Because it's a useful wedge issue. And if they
Yeah.
codified it into law, then that steals their ability to campaign on it.
Yes. I mean, again, I can't disagree with you on that. That's definitely, more than plausible. It is probably the reason why it was never codified. So, which again just makes me incredibly sad. But what I've done here is I've just put the Politico draft of the Politico reporting of the leak of Samuel Alito's draft opinion, and I've put that chart now. The draft opinion, from my understanding, was circulated in mid-February. And I know there are other astrologers that have used that as the date, but I've chosen to go ahead and use the date that the Politico article came out. Yeah. And so it doesn't change it massively. The dates that I've seen other astrologers use, as I said, was like around February 10th. I'm using the 2nd of May. I still think that there's a lot you can pull from either chart, really. But for me, again, I think what stands out is, first of all, look where Jupiter is. Jupiter is sitting on top of that ascendant. It's basically, putting this back into the spotlight in such a huge way. Which I just thought was absolutely fascinating. We also have Pluto sitting on top of Roe v. Wade's Mercury. Now, we didn't talk about Mercury in the last chart, but of course, Mercury is the ruler of the moon in Virgo. Mm-hmm. And so, and it's a rather wide conjunction, but it is conjunct Jupiter in the original Roe v. Wade chart. So I think it's interesting to have Pluto basically sitting on top of these two. Almost, the astrologer Robert Schmidt said that he was thinking along the lines of seeing Pluto as a transcendent Mercury, i.e., Mercury is the one that questions. Mercury is the one that disassembles things so that they can be put back together, to really truly understand the parts. So if we think of Pluto as a transcendent Mercury, It's doing that mercurial function in like a really heavy, big macrocosmic way. As you were saying so well earlier, when America catches a cold, everybody, or rather when America sneezes, everyone else catches a cold. I'm so stealing that. I thought that was brilliant. So yeah, here we're seeing Pluto sitting on Mercury. It's deconstruction time. Not deconstruction as in the philosophical deconstruction, but you know what I mean. We're gonna start, we're gonna tear this thing apart. I think it's really interesting that you also have the South Node is sitting on the Sun Moon midpoint. South Node K2 is known for elimination and release, and sitting on that Sun Moon midpoint, I thought was striking, as well as the Politico ascendant is basically not far from there, sitting on the Roe v. Wade part of fortune.
Just talk us through the Sun Moon midpoint for a second then.
So the Sun Moon midpoint is, I'm not a huge midpoint user, but the two that I will always just look at and call up on my charts are the Sun Moon midpoint and the ascendant midheaven midpoint, which you can see is here.
That's what it is. I was wondering what it was that's just conjunct Vesta, that which people hold sacred.
Yeah, so isn't that interesting? I mean, it is a wide conjunction here, because this one is 14 degrees and this one's 23.
All right.
But even then, and Vesta is actually conjunct Saturn here, which is really interesting. But even then, when you're looking at transits to the ascendant midheaven midpoint, you are directly speaking to the public value of something.
Yeah.
We're speaking to something that will affect you in the public sphere. When you're looking at a Sun Moon midpoint, you are speaking to something that is maybe a bit more internal in a way. It's the middle between the sun that is, has this kind of intellectual and yang kind of feeling of illumination, versus the moon that has this more internal emotional sense of things. And so when you're hitting that midpoint, you're signaling that there's some kind of change that is affecting you both externally and internally. In ninth house, a philosophical way, something to do with belief systems. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, again, I just thought that was really, really striking. The Politico part of fortune, or a lot of fortune, is sitting on top of Roe v. Wade's Uranus. I mean, again, you just can't make some of this stuff up. It's just insane. You have Ceres, which interestingly, again, I like to look at these asteroid goddesses in both the light and the shadow. So Ceres, of course, is the Roman name for the goddess Demeter. And we're talking about, usually talking about where someone is nourishing and has this kind of maternal instinct. But Ceres has a dark side too, which is, where are we exerting control? Right? Like, where are we being, where are we being the helicopter parent? And it's not so much about what's good for you, but what I want from you, So Ceres is sitting on Roe v. Wade's IC, the foundation, the core identity of what Roe v. Wade stands for is having this outside controlling influence come up on it. And of course, I can't help but think of for example, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who is, she was brought up, I believe, in the Roman Catholic Church, but has been very, very public about her opposition to Roe v. Wade. And from what I understand, has been part of a ecumenical, thank you, group that I think they're called People of Praise. And just gonna move that over slightly. And if I recall correctly, they were, I'm just gonna pull up what I was reading. Apparently, she was associated with this group, and when she became nominated for the Supreme Court, all references to her being part of this group were literally scrubbed from the internet. But of course, it's the internet, so we can still see. So Barrett and her husband, along with their 7 children, are members of an obscure group called People of Praise. Members of the group swear a lifelong oath of loyalty called a covenant to one another, and are assigned and are accountable to a personal advisor called a head for men and a handmaid for women. That's apparently been changed now, that they don't use the term handmaid now. I can't remember what the term is they use now, but this was what it,
think why.
This was what it was called. The group teaches that husbands are the heads of their wives and should take authority over their family. The group describes itself as charismatic Christian community. The heads and handmaids are given direction on important decisions, on important decisions, including whom to date, who to marry, where to live, where to take a job, buy a home, or how to raise children. And, at the end of the day, there's no getting away from the fact that in the leaked draft, Justice Alito is calling on a 17th century English misogynist by the name of, I believe, Martin Hale, who basically was saying the same thing. Women are the property of their fathers and then become the property of their husbands. There's no such thing as marital rape because the woman's body is the extension of the man's.
There's one thing to be said for Amy Coney Barrett, though. At least in her confirmation hearings, she turned around and said quite openly, I believe this law is up for reconsideration.
Yes, which you could argue some of the other justices weren't maybe quite so upfront about. So yes, I will absolutely give her that. And interestingly, so I did have to go back and look at all the justices. And of course, I believe I pulled up her chart and found out that let me just put this up here. I don't believe we have a timed chart for her. So this is a 12 noon chart. It's not a timed chart. However, look where she's got Venus. Her Venus is in Pisces. So here is someone who, you could argue on the face of it, does have potentially that empathy. Although I know that there are astrologers who say just because a planet is in its exaltation doesn't mean that that planet is always going to play nice. In fact, exaltation can point to a kind of arrogance.
Again, with Vesta being right there.
Say that again, Dee?
Again, with Vesta being right there, what she holds.
Yes, and I think it's really interesting that we have Vesta. Vesta does show up again and again and again. I'm just trying to think of what I want to show you next. I think I'm going to show you.
Can we just go back to that joint chart for the other two for a second?
Oh, of course. So so I'm going to put up Roe v. Wade back.
Roe and the link, yes. Yeah. The reason I wanted to point out, because one thing that really jumps out on me, Chiron return.
Yes, I'm sorry. I did have, yes. And how unbelievable is that? They are literally on top of each other. This is a revisiting of the wound that was hopefully being addressed, but nevertheless continues to be a festering wound.
Yeah.
And yes,
Yeah.
100%.
That speaks so loudly in the context.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, it absolutely stands out. It's interesting, you know, we've got Venus also, you know, co-present here in Aries. And then let's see, what else did I want to point out? I think interestingly, you've got the leak, the Mercury of the leak is on top of Vesta.
Yeah.
So again, that kind of idea that I'm disassembling, I'm being a thief of the night, I'm going to reveal something or throw something up in the air that is to do with something that we thought was protected, that we thought had integrity, that we thought was, you know, there for keeps.
Right, sorry for taking over there. Take us where you was going to take us.
No. So I mean, you know, I think I'm just trying to see if there was a couple of other points that I was going to make. So Pluto conjunct Mercury. Let's see. I was looking at Venus. So Venus is square. That was what I was looking at. Venus here is square Venus it's by sign, but it's square Roe v. Wade's Venus. And so whenever you have a square, you're looking at, you know, basically a challenge to the status quo. And so whereas, you know, Venus in Capricorn wanted to be, you know, stable, secure, practical, Venus in Aries is going to be really kind of chasing those challenges. And you could argue that this is speaking to, you know, in the draft opinion, this idea that it's got to be left up to the states. You know, to keep the harmony, we got to leave it up to the states to decide whether or not, you know, abortion is, you know, we're not striking down abortion per se. We're simply saying that it has to be decided on a state by state level. We do not have any business deciding it for the whole country on a federal basis.
And as that square perfects, the debate gets louder and stronger.
100%. The final statement from the Supreme Court isn't expected until the end of June, beginning of July. Yeah. And so that is absolutely what we're going to be seeing.
And so that will be so I did notice in the first chart, Venus square Chiron.
Yes.
So
exactly square. Yeah.
So as Venus comes to conjunct Chiron, it affects that square. Yes.
You know, and again, I think you can also look at this Saturn here. I mean, this Saturn and Vesta. Ooh, sorry, am I echoing? The Saturn and Vesta is trine. Sorry, here I am. It's trine again widely, but by sign, the Roe v. Wade
Saturn.
So, you know, we're looking here at a real kind of intellectual sparring over how Roe v. Wade can be eliminated. Saturn stands for elimination. So the only other thing that I'll draw to your attention, which I thought was rather interesting. So Roe v. Wade originally had the nodal axis in the Capricorn Cancer axis. Okay, so Capricorn Cancer is going to speak to, you know, if we think of Cancer as building, but building for the self, right? So Cancer wants to build these walls that will emotionally protect the self. Whereas Capricorn is a bit more universal. Capricorn will build literally physical walls, but it's more, it goes beyond the individual. We're talking about, like, you know, the world at large, if you will, society. So, you know, you could say this is the individual, this is society. And so we've got that nodal axis here. Now, if I go ahead and change this, let me see if I can pull up. Oh, no, it won't let me pull that up. So let me do it this way. So we've got law. Here we go. That's the one I pull up. So can you see that okay?
Yep.
So what we have on the outside ring is Planned Parenthood versus Casey.
Right.
So just to give you a quick, super quick run through, Roe v. Wade came into force in 1973. And as we said earlier, the New Christian Right, the Federalist Society, this kind of conservative push to overturn Roe v. Wade really kind of came up through the cracks through the 70s and really gained momentum in the 80s and early 90s. And so by 1992, and there were you know, chips along the way. You know, Roe v. Wade was chipped at in various ways, but ultimately upheld through all those different attempts until we get to 1992. Now, at this point, the conservatives are thinking, yes, we've got them. We are going to overturn Roe v. Wade. And I loved reading about the drama within this, because the justices actually had, again, 9 justices on the Supreme Court, and Anthony Kennedy was the justice that was voting to overturn Roe v. Wade. And interestingly, that, you know, depending on which source you read, Sandra Day O'Connor, who was the first female justice to be installed in the Supreme Court, and David Souter, I believe that's how you pronounce his surname. I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. They managed to somehow persuade Justice Kennedy to change his vote. And what you had as a result was Planned Parenthood versus Casey, where Roe v. Wade was upheld, but with a lot of caveats. So, for example, one caveat that they were trying to go for was to say that a woman had to inform her husband. And they decided that there were too many troubling issues around doing that. And so they decided they weren't going to ask women to inform their husbands, but they did, I believe, say that minors had to inform their parents. Yeah. There was a waiting period. And then the big change was Roe v. Wade was based on a trimester system. So you could have an abortion in the first, all states had to provide an access to abortion in the first trimester, but states could decide at what point in the second trimester they felt that the fetus had become viable, and then able to ban abortions by state in the third trimester if they deemed that the fetus was viable. Well, what Planned Parenthood versus Casey did was they did away with the trimester system and said that you have to show that there's an undue burden being placed on the woman. And so again, you're just getting it watered down. So even though the conservatives thought Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned, and were really surprised that it wasn't, what they did see was basically the setup for how Roe v. Wade could be overturned, because they gave states back a lot more power. And then this gave rise to what we were seeing in the last few years with the Texas law and the Mississippi law that is being currently argued in front of the Supreme Court. So in this particular one, again, it's just so interesting. Black Moon Lilith is on top of Roe v. Wade's sun.
Yeah.
We've got the Uranus-Neptune conjunction sitting on top of that north node. And you could argue kind of the midpoint between Venus and Jupiter.
Yeah.
We've got that Pluto and IC kind of sitting on top of that sun moon midpoint. We've got Vesta sitting again kind of on that midpoint between Roe v. Wade's moon and the descendant. And then I think the thing that really got me was it's a nodal return. You can see that the north node is back in Capricorn and the south node is back in Cancer. So I thought it was really interesting. In other words, the nodal return, if it had been a nodal reversal where the past meets the future,
Yeah.
we might have expected Roe v. Wade to be overturned. But in this case, because it was a nodal return, we see Roe v. Wade being upheld, even if it is in a different form, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then what else
You've
did I
got
want
moon
to
on the IC there as well, the Parenthood's moon over Roe v. Wade's IC.
Literally on top of it. I mean, again, this is with about a 4-degree orb, but yeah, that's on top of that. Venus is on top of Roe v. Wade's south node, or K2. We do have, I thought this was interesting, we have Planned Parenthood versus Casey's Chiron in Leo on top of Roe v. Wade's Law of Spirit. And if you think of Law of Spirit as being, the Law of Spirit represents where your life's work.
Yeah.
And Chiron is going poke, 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 poke. So yeah, again, just I just think it's interesting how these charts tell a story that is so similar to that which we're seeing in the real world. The only other thing I'll point out here too, if you notice where Planned Parenthood versus Casey's Mars is, it's in 10 degrees Taurus. And of course, as we know, what's been hovering over that point over the last 18 months to 2 years? Uranus.
Yep.
So we've got a real kind of, again, poke, poke, poke.
Never mind the solar eclipse from 3 weeks ago.
Yes, literally on that point.
Yeah.
Literally on that point.
So is there any charts that offer us some hope?
Yeah, exactly, right? I'm just trying to think.
Unfortunately, with their past charts and what have you, these are all narratives. And we could see from that Venus square that the debate, the challenge to it is just going to intensify.
Yeah.
It's a battle that both sides hold sacred by the amount of Vesta peppered across everything that we've looked at.
Yes. What each side is holding sacred, 100%. I'm just trying to see if I can bring up. I was going to bring up. Let's see. I think. Yeah. Here we go. Let's try that one. So what I have here is Planned Parenthood on the inside, and Justice. So Justice John G. Roberts is actually the head justice.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find really interesting is in that leaked draft opinion, he wasn't the author, which as the head justice, he normally would be. The next most senior justice would be Clarence Thomas, and he didn't author it either. So again, there's like this bit of intrigue, like, wait, so why exactly was Alito asked to write this? So I I don't know. I've kind of got my hopes pinned on Justice Roberts. Now, unfortunately, this is also not a timed chart. So it's set for 12 noon.
Yeah.
Um,
What does
but
that actually mean? That means that the John Roberts ascendant and houses we can't really pay a lot of attention to, and also his moon, but that's about it really, isn't it? Because even Mercury is only going to be a degree out or 2 degrees out at most, isn't it?
exactly. The moon, of course, could be, up to 13 degrees on either side, and you wouldn't be looking at the ascendant or the midheaven.
Yeah.
But everything else is fair game, 100%. And so it is really interesting because we've got, for example, the sun, Justice Roberts' sun, is sitting on top of Planned Parenthood versus Casey's Ceres and Black Moon Lilith conjunction, which we didn't talk about.
Ooh,
But again,
we should bring that one in.
yeah, it's really interesting because this is, this, I think what a lot of people struggle with is, one way of looking at this is the fact that there are so many women who are willing to sacrifice their rights to overturn Roe v. Wade. The problem that a lot of people have with overturning Roe v. Wade is they feel that it's going to be a very slippery slope. Anyone who's read Margaret Atwood's work and her we thought fantastical tale of Gilead, is going to think that it couldn't possibly go in that direction, and yet you have governors and senators in states like North and South Dakota and Nebraska that are saying things such as the life of the fetus is more important than the woman's.
Which beggars the imagination, because the moment that fetus leaves the womb, it has no support whatsoever from the,
and especially if the state's not supporting it.
Yeah.
I personally, I don't want to go too political, but I personally can't wrap my head around, what are they going to do with all these babies being born? And I'm sorry I didn't look this up, Dee, but I meant to check into what I believe was a corollary that was written about in Freakonomics, which was a book that was released, I don't know, probably a good while ago now, but I'm pretty sure I remember reading in Freakonomics that they saw, after Roe v. Wade was brought into force, that there was a drop in crime. Now, we're not talking causation and effect necessarily, but nevertheless, it does again beg the question: if we are preventing unwanted children from flooding society, then that is going to bring about a drop in crime.
Mississippi is a prime example, because the governor has turned around and said, well, if you don't want the baby, you can put it up for adoption. But they do not invest anywhere near enough in their own foster care system, and have the highest rate of child poverty in the States.
It's horrific. The US is supposed to be the richest nation in the world.
Yeah. And I also think the Republicans, in a way, are shooting themselves in the foot, because they get this passed, they lose their wedge issue. But then again, do they? Because then it's the Democrats' turn to take charge of the debate, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, maybe they're letting it play this way because they feel that this will allow them to, typically the midterm elections that are coming up in November 2022 are seen as a swing back in the direction opposite to the incumbent president. So, Republicans were hoping to, sweep the midterms. it's really hard to know. We had some primaries yesterday, day before yesterday, and a lot of Trump candidates won
Yes.
in state primaries. So, having said that, a lot of progressive Democrats won as well.
Yeah.
So there is a silver lining there. There is a silver
Yes.
lining there.
And there is one or two Trump candidates that fortunately didn't win. Was it
Yes.
Dr. Oz lost to a hedge fund manager? Which I just think there's just a comedy element to that.
There is absolutely
Either of them, but nevertheless, that is so funny. Is that we have 5 minutes remaining. Do we want to look at any further charts, or shall we save it for, because I know you've got a lot more charts in there.
Well, I wanted to just again point out, I guess this is my silver lining, I think. And that is, look at Justice Roberts' nodal axis.
Oh. Yes, because that's, with it being a noon chart, that's going to make a difference of maybe a minute, or
Exactly.
Maybe.
So I mean, ultimately, his nodal axis is falling in the Capricorn Cancer polarity. And so, in the same way that we saw Planned Parenthood upholding Roe v. Wade with that same nodal axis, this is partly where I'm coming from when I say, maybe there's hope on the court. Maybe this is why that draft opinion wasn't written by Roberts, because his vote is still up for grabs. Maybe. It's hard to know.
And it shows how murky. I was just trying to think of the significations of how that Uranus-Neptune conjunction within Planned Parenthood versus Casey's chart would affect things. And my own thought is basically there's a huge element of muddying the water.
Yes. 100%. I think, it's funny because the astrologer Caroline Casey talked about Uranus-Neptune as being this kind of like spiritual activist kind of vibe. However, I think in practice, certainly here in this chart, all we saw was a blurring of the lines. And, again, what a lot of people said was that this was a way of muddying the waters enough to give states the confidence to go ahead and put these laws into place that were directly challenging Roe v. Wade. In other words, to bring it back to the Supreme Court's kind of
attention.
Purview. So I'm going to stop here because I know it can get very, very heavy as well. I will just add very quickly that I thought it was fascinating to find, and let me just see if I can get it up for you. When I was researching this for today's episode, I ended up just downloading and creating all these different charts, as you know, including the chart of the woman Jane Roe, who first instigated, if you will, the case for Roe v. Wade, and the child that she was carrying when she instigated the case. Or brought the case to court, if you will. In the end, the Texas Circuit of Appeals, I think, or the Texas Circuit that she was bringing the case to, she actually, the original woman, Jane Roe, that was a pseudonym, she actually won the case, but she didn't have an abortion. She ended up having the baby and giving it up for adoption. And so for years, the anti-abortion movement was looking for this child because they thought, oh, this is, she's going to be the poster child for the anti-abortion movement. And they did eventually find her, but it's quite sad. I was reading a story written by a gentleman who reached out to this child, who's now a grown woman with children of her own, and with her permission ended up writing the whole story. I think it's called The Rowe Story or The Rowe Family. I can't remember exactly the name of the book, but to promote the book, they did an article in the Atlantic, and when you read that article, it's quite sad. Jane Rowe's real name was Norma McCorvey. She ended up going from being someone who was pro-choice to anti-abortion when she became a born-again Christian. She then tried to go and find the daughter that she gave up for adoption. The daughter, of course, had no idea, her name is Shelley Thornton, that she was the Roe v. Wade baby. And sadly, she never met with Norma McCorvey because it was just too traumatic. And the way the article ends is really quite touching, because she says, you know, I was labeled as being anti-abortion, but that's not true, because if anything, you know, she's having to live with this feeling of being an unwanted baby after all, given that she never reconciled with her birth mother.
Oh, yeah, it's really hard to think what a headspace that must be like.
It's heartrending. It's absolutely heartrending. So yeah, sorry for ending on a heavy note.
Yeah, I was going to say, so that completely blows out of the water all sort of positive. So where can people find you, Joli? Because they want to be cheered up by you. They want you to give them faith.
Well, and you know, that this is it. I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm going to continue looking at these charts, because I do like to see where we can find silver linings. I think that, you know, when we talk about fate versus free will, we have something that is clearly indicated by charts, but, you know, I do believe that we have a choice in terms of how that energy is manifested. I think the energy shows up on a spectrum, and the free will comes in with where the native wants to express which part of that spectrum.
Now, just to emphasize that, I've had a personal reading myself from Joli, and that positive viewpoint is constantly there, but not in a saccharine fashion. At no point did Joli back away from saying there's this challenge and there's this challenge, but she was identifying the challenges and potential solutions. So it's not just you hear on YouTube people calling the love and light astrologers, and although I had to go at David on our last moon video, saying, have you got anything cheerful to say, you typical Capricorn?
Oh no.
And which he does have, and Joli, I can not recommend Joli enough. So now there's your plug. Where do people find you, Joli?
Thanks, Dee. So I've got a website, which is bohdimindful.com. And so that's as in under the Bodhi tree. So BODHIMINDFUL.com. And you can find me on Facebook, Bohdimindful. I'm also on Instagram at Bohdimindful. And I also do a chat with my fabulous friend, our fabulous friend, Saffron Dennis. It's called Mad Birds, Two Mad Birds Astrology, or Mad Birds Astrology, and that is on Clubhouse, usually every other Thursday. We will be doing an episode today, Thursday, May 19th.
And of course, Joli is another member of the Astro-Collective. So as David and I keep pushing the Astro-Collective Facebook page, you will also see when Two Mad Birds and Jolly's own blog and website will be publicised on there, so you can keep up to date with everything that we're going on. Just as a quick conclusion, this was episode 1, isn't it? We're going into this some more.
I would love to, and then maybe I can do it in such a way where we're not ending on such a heavy note. So I would love to.
Yeah. Put the miserable bit in the middle, not the end.
I will make sure to do that.
Jolly, thank you so much for coming onto the show. So as ever, all of Jolly's details will of course be down below in the description. While you're here, if you've stuck with us this far and not jumped off a bridge, then hit that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and head over to the Astro-Collective page on Facebook and subscribe there as well. So thank you, Jolly, thank you very much. And I can't wait till we get to work on episode 2 of this.
Thanks so much, Dee. I really appreciate it.